Hello and welcome to Outlook on Air. This podcast is designed to keep you connected with all things Outlook, with special emphasis on our enrichment program and its many activities and services. On this podcast, we'll hear from Outlook associates, donors to our many programs, clients of our services, and much more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this edition of Outlook on Air. Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Outlook on Air from the Palatial Podcast Studio here at Outlook Enrichment. I once again am your host, Dennis Nelson, and I'm very excited for today's guest. This may be one of our longer podcasts that we will present you with, but as always, we certainly hope you will enjoy every moment of the podcast. I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. Our guest today is Jill Thomas, and if that is a name that maybe rings a bell with some of you, you'll find out exactly who she is, why she's here, and things of that sort. And in fact, I have so many questions that I want to ask her. I'm going to jump right in here and get started. So, Jill, why don't you start out telling us a little bit about who you are and why you're here today?
Right, the mystery voice over
Yes.
here. Who is this person? Most people that know me in the Omaha area know me from doing a radio show for a number of years. Did a morning radio show called Pat and JT in the Morning, and we were on for about 17 years. And had a ton of fun, and then started a production company for podcasts and got that going. And so that's kind of my local thing. I actually grew up in Ashland, so I was from the area and went to school at Arizona State, and I started my radio career in Phoenix. And then eventually came back to Central Nebraska and then Lincoln and then Omaha. And here we are. And so that's kind of the little in a nutshell.
What station were you on here?
KQKQ.
Oh.
Sweet 98.
Yeah, Sweet 98,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Awesome.
So it was a lot of fun. We had a great time, got to meet a lot of neat people and do some fun stuff. And Omaha, and I have to say, you know, the environment and landscape has changed so much with podcasting coming in. And I am so glad that we were able to ride that wave as it was just starting to hit the area and people were starting to break out. There were no podcast production companies when we started, and that was about 6 years ago. And there was nothing between Chicago and Denver for sure.
Yeah.
And maybe even farther than that, you know, and so we were kind of surprised because most production studios around here were made for commercial production and that their business model wasn't set up for podcast production.
No.
And then once people figured out, oh, I can do this myself. And then they were able to kind of learn, and we could guide some people. I was more than happy to tell anybody, here's my recommendations for a home studio, and ask any way I can help you. I'd love to help you because I think it's fun to have everybody get a chance to get behind the mic.
I agree. I was behind the mic too, as you will probably hear at some point here.
Very good. Yeah, we're going to talk. As a matter of fact, we might as well just go ahead and do that because I as much as I love, well, I don't want to say I love it. I've only been interviewed 3 times on a podcast. It's the weirdest feeling in the world because it's really like flipping the switch on me, right? You're flipping the script.
It's true.
And it is interesting to be the guest. And since I kind of feel much more comfortable if I'm in the interviewer's or the driver's seat. And so I'm going to flip seats with you because my understanding, a lot of people hold you in very high regard. A lot of people don't know everything about your background and maybe don't know all the things that you've done or how everything is all connected and kind of lay out the whole roadmap. Would love to have an opportunity to get to know you better.
Oh, for heaven's sake. Yeah, there have been a lot of requests for somebody to interview me, so this would, I guess, be that opportunity. So.
I think it's a great opportunity, and I would love to. I'm very grateful to have that chance to do it myself.
Well, this is great. I don't have to ask the questions for a change. I just get to answer them.
That's right.
I like this.
That's exactly right.
All right.
What would be your elevator pitch if you were going to talk to somebody and they said, "Well, tell me more about yourself. Where do you start?"
Well, I usually start with where I was born if we get into this. So I was born on January 13th, 1958 in St. Paul, Minnesota at St. Paul Ramsey Hospital. For anybody who's familiar with the area, that's where I was born. what happened is, shortly after I was born, as the story goes, I obviously don't have many memories of this, but I was almost immediately turned over for adoption, put up for adoption. So my parents, or at least my mother, was from Wisconsin, nearby Wisconsin, probably a town like Ladysmith or New Richmond or one of those, who knows, but I don't remember anymore. And but I was turned over to Wisconsin jurisdiction, however, not before they had discovered that I had a problem with my left eye. My left eye was very large. Neither one of them, as it turned out, worked. Neither of my eyes worked. I am totally blind.
You were born blind?
Yes, I was born blind.
Okay.
So they figured that out in a big hurry. But what they were concerned about was that my left eye was also enlarged. So shortly after birth, they removed my left eye because they thought it had cancer. I guess it turned out it did not. But I did have congenitally detached retinas. And so, yes, I was born totally blind and handed off very quickly to the state of Wisconsin. And I spent 3 years in a foster home in Sauk City, Wisconsin, which is a little town just northwest of Madison, Wisconsin, for people familiar with that area. And I spent 3.5 years there, but then I was adopted by my parents, which was quite significant because they both had vision issues as well. My dad was what we call a high partial. He had quite a bit of usable vision, but not enough to drive. My mom was totally blind herself. She had glaucoma back when they couldn't do as much about it as they can now.
So she had her vision for quite a while before she lost it? Okay.
Yeah, she had her vision through high school, essentially. Her senior year in high school, she lost her vision.
Wow.
So yes, she had seen, but was totally blind by the time they got me.
Yeah. Oh, my God. Well, that had to be, okay, I can see 6 of one, half a dozen of the other here. You can see the advantages because they absolutely could empathize with you,
right.
And understood how you would experience things.
Well, the thing was that back then it was not, an accepted thing really to be blind in any way, shape, or form and have children. So there was a major concern with the adoption agency and so forth that they worked with. And I, again, I was very tiny, don't remember much of all of what they went through, but I know they were under tremendous scrutiny when they got me.
Wow.
That scrutiny went on when they also adopted my sister about 2 years later. So
is she blind as well?
No, she is not. She can see. She can see perfectly and drives and all that kind of stuff. She now lives with me and drives me around if I need it, that kind of thing. So luckily we've kind of hung together, which is kind of strange because we got very, very much apart.
Yeah.
But we've kind of come back together again, so it's kind of cool that way.
That is neat. That is neat, too, that the family was chosen and formed together and you guys all connected.
Yeah, in its own weird way. It was, it wasn't something they sat and planned out completely, but it just all kind of naturally came together, and we ended up having a fully sighted person in the family that eventually could drive for all of us and do some of those things that we all take for granted.
Right.
And yet, in the early years, everybody learned from everybody else, and it made for quite an interesting life.
I do have a question for you growing up.
Sure.
Because I'm sure you've been asked the question, what's it like to grow up blind? It's like, well, you don't know any different.
No.
It's like this is how I grew up. Was there challenges that you remember or recall that were specifically, you were like, are sighted people dealing with this, or is this just a me thing, or was it, it was just part of growing up?
I didn't experience much of that, but I think part of that, Jill, is because I lived in the same community that the School for the Visually Handicapped, as it was called back then, WSVH, it was known as then, was in the same town, and with my parents being blind, they had a lot of friends. So I was pretty socially accepted. I was definitely accepted at the school, obviously, and I did go there. I did attend. I was known as a town kid because I lived in the same town.
The townies. Okay, okay.
I was one of those. So I didn't have to live there. I in my later years, I ended up staying there a lot overnight because of different events and things. But and that was a nice thing they offered. But I was able to go to school there, and so I didn't have a lot of the acceptance problems that I might have had I gone to public school. I was offered that opportunity my junior year to go to public school. At that time, I probably unwisely turned it down because I was so ingrained in my school and my friends and all that kind of thing that I did not accept their invitation to do that.
Yeah. Do you regret that at all, do you think? Or?
Yeah, maybe a little, but I think at the time it was probably a good move to make. I do miss it because I could have found out some of those things, like how well was I accepted?
That's interesting.
Those kinds of things.
Because you really don't know.
No.
What the outcome would have been. But still, everything turned out good the road that you chose.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Hard to complain.
No, yeah,
I guess really, right?
Exactly.
So after high school, what happened? Where'd you go?
Okay, well, after high school, I went to college. I went to UW Stevens Point, spent 2 years there, but decided that college just wasn't for me. I mean, I did okay, and I was, passing and stuff, but I really wasn't enjoying it. It just wasn't a fun experience for me. So I ended up leaving after 2 years. And I did some other things in life along the way. I ran a coffee shop, the state office building coffee shop in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for a while, but turned out that my partner wasn't quite as honest and was running off with some of the money, and that led to court litigations and all kinds of fun things. Getting out of the business enterprises program that I was in, and it was a big mess. It wasn't as fun as it was supposed to be. Some other things growing up, I attended the Arkansas Enterprises for the Blind for about a year and a half down there, learning I was going to try to become a taxpayer service representative. But there again, it was like, no, I don't want to do that either. That was not my idea of fun.
It's good to hear, though, you're honest with yourself. It's like you're trying to find the right path, and you're not just doing what you're told you should do.
Not at all.
Right? It was still your choice. It's still your option of what I want to do that makes me feel good.
Right. Well, I did that, and I did a number of other things as well. I worked at Freedom Scientific for a number of years, over 8 years with them, working with the popular screen reader JAWS for Windows and all the various other things that they support. And certainly most people listening to this podcast are familiar at least with the company, and probably JAWS as well, JAWS for Windows.
New to me.
Yeah.
I hadn't, and that's a whole new world for me, period, is all of the technology that's available, because obviously I wasn't exposed to any of it, right?
Yeah.
So this is fascinating to me. So can you tell me a little bit more what that is?
JAWS is actually on my computer, and I use it all the time to know that I'm recording this file, doing all the kinds of things that you do with a computer. It talks to me, and I can tell, if the audio is recording, all that fun kind of thing. I mean, that's just a very basic. I don't want to get too technical here, but
it gives you access.
Yes, complete access.
Yes.
That's what's nice about JAWS. And then I also have a Braille display that I use when I want to read questions and those kinds of things. That's hooked up and running through the JAWS software as well. So it's a very immersive experience for sure.
Was that kind of new when you were working there? Was that kind of innovative at that time at the company you were working at?
It was newer. It had been out for quite some time. There'd been a number of these different screen reading programs available. Window Eyes was another one that was real big at the time.
Would this have been like in the 80s?
Yeah, 80s.
Okay, so things really, you were right on the cutting edge of a lot of stuff. Yeah.
I was, no doubt about it. And then even before that, there was Screen Power for DOS and Windows and some things like that. So I was definitely on the cutting edge, and it's developed a whole lot more since. But
right.
Yeah, it was
right.
It
So
was
that's
fun.
like an industry leader. I mean, I'm not trying to blow smoke here. I'm just saying that's because I'm not going to get ahead of ourselves, but why you're where you are. And we'll get more into that as we move forward, but why you're here and what all it involves. But all of that just formed a really solid foundation for where you were going.
Well, before I ended up at Freedom Scientific, just to backtrack a little bit, I also worked for a cable television company, and I think they're partly responsible, too, for where I ended up as well. I was living in Minneapolis at the time. Yes, I'd moved from southern Wisconsin up to Minneapolis by then. Worked for a cable television company in Minneapolis at that time. Well, when I first went to work there, it was known as Rogers Cable, and then it became Paragon Cable, and I believe now it's Time Warner. So they've had their own transitions, but worked there as well. And I think as far as my first major real job, that was a real, I don't know, eye-opener for me, if you will. It taught me a lot about the work world and 401ks and all that kind of stuff that I had no exposure to, and I was too stupid to realize what a great job it actually was at the time.
Okay, hindsight, as they say, right? Yeah, I get it. I had a couple of those too.
Well, I started out in telemarketing with them and then moved into customer service and credit and collections, and also was their switchboard operator. Too. So I did a number of things for just that company. But then after that, I had been learning computers a little tiny bit from some sighted folks at the cable company that were into computers. They didn't know how to teach me. They didn't know all the things that a blind person might need to know, but they were really great in their own way.
Wow.
And got me into computers, and that's how I eventually ended up at Freedom Scientific, because I did a lot of work for, at that time, a company called Real Networks. They had a program out called Real Player and Real Audio and all that kind of stuff. So I was on the cutting edge with some of that kind of thing too, and I was helping the Real Networks folks with accessibility issues for blind people. And that's how Freedom Scientific, one of the ways they started hearing about me, and that's, again, the company that makes that JAWS that we were talking about a little earlier. So that's how I got on with them. But the big thing that I'm not telling you, and I saved it purposely for last, was that throughout all these things that we talked about that I've done, through everything, when I was about 5 years old, I had a real passion, and that was not only to listen to radio, as a lot of blind people like to do and so forth. I mean, obviously, it's a sound and something we can relate to even more than television. So I was a big radio nut from starting at about 5 years old, but I took it many steps further and wanted not only to hear the radio and hear all the people on it, but I said, I want to be on it. I want to be doing the radio thing.
So how old were you when you first did radio? When you first were, whether it was just an interview or actually had a job?
Yeah, high school.
High school.
High school.
That's amazing. See, that's when, just real quick to relate to you, radio was not on my radar. It was by happenstance through opportunities that a door opened, and I thought I was going in a completely different direction. I actually... Long story short, I was a rodeo queen and in Phoenix, Arizona, and was wrapping up my reign, and I got to be interviewed on radio station KNIX in Phoenix by the morning show, Stephen Martin. And he was the king of the valley as far as that went, as far as he was been around for years.
Sure.
And he's the one that off the air, he asked me, so now that you're done with this, what are you going to do? And he said, have you ever thought about going into radio? And I did not know that was a job. I'm like, you get paid to do this? Because I'm just like, you're kidding me. You get paid to do this. And so he kind of pointed me in the right direction, and then everything just sort of fell in place. But and I was 20 at that point.
Sure.
So I had no idea. And I was a radio, I grew up listening to.
Sure.
And had my favorite people on the air and I loved listening to the like mystery theater type. You could listen to the Green Lantern or whatever, all those kind of shows where they painted a picture for you.
Right.
Yeah. And that was one of my favorite. But anyway, I find that interesting because you had the bug. You had the bug.
I did. And I learned probably earlier than you that, people do get paid for it. And of course, I used to think that jingles, which are a big part of radio stations, I used to think that people, when I was real little, I used to think people came down there and sang about the radio station.
Well, it's so funny is that when I worked at the station in Hastings, and it had been there for a number of years, but they had a theater that was connected to the radio station, and literally, that's where they did the live radio shows. And so people were on stage and they had people that made the sound effects or the walking across the stage or they're ringing the bells or making the phone or, making different noises with their hands.
Sure.
And they'd be on stage and people could come watch in the audience, watch the live radio show, or they just could be listening to it as it was going on. But so you're not too far off, really, because there were some elements of that. Back in the day. But you think about there's just little people in there coming down to sing for the radio station.
Yeah, that's what I thought at the time. I never.
That's okay. They were doing a good job.
But then I took my radio career to even bigger heights because I was not. Then eventually, as I got more and more into it, I not only wanted to do the radio itself and be the DJ and all that kind of stuff, I wanted to do the commercials because I started seeing that a lot of the jocks, if you will, at the radio stations were running off and doing their own commercials. And I said, I want to be able to do that. So many blind people I know that worked in radio, they weren't doing that. They were having somebody record them, and they maybe would just do their voiceover stuff, and then they would leave and
not doing the production.
None. They had no concept. I wanted to know the concept of doing production and how does this work? How do you create a commercial? So I got the chance to do that. And in fact, at the end of this, I'm going to let the folks hear a couple of samples, just small ones of my work. So,
very good. Very good.
That'll be happening.
That's awesome. That's really fascinating, though, because it is the whole wanting to know how things work is probably what's driven you to where you are today.
Probably.
It's to get you, because I don't. After let's go to the 80s, get into the 90s, and I got to ask too, because I know that Outlook itself has been Outlook Enrichment 25 years.
Yes.
So all of the 2000s. So that you aren't too far away at that point. You're in the 90s. You weren't too far away from possibly making your connection with this program?
No, I actually wasn't. And we can talk about that. I was actually working at a radio station in South Georgia, and back in my Freedom Scientific days, I met the guy who is now our IT manager here, Mitch Green, his name is, and we were real good friends. And when he got back here and had gone through some trials and tribulations of his own, he got a job here at Outlook doing IT. He's our IT manager now. And when he got the job doing the IT work, eventually they got around to asking about, anybody else who might like to do this? And he recommended me because we'd done our work at Freedom Scientific and had gotten to be really good friends. And I used to come here and visit him even when we worked in totally different places and all that kind of thing. I would come back and visit the family. I got to know the family.
Sure.
And so he thought of me. And before I knew it, here I'm working at this radio station in South Georgia, having a great time, on top of my game, all that kind of thing. And Mitch called and he said, we do have an availability now if you think you might want to do IT. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to hang up the radio career because, Outlook, Nebraska doesn't do any kind of radio things, and I wouldn't expect them to, and all that kind of thing. So I knew what I was getting into. So that was a little bit disconcerting in some ways, but cool in another. And by that time, I was getting, I guess I can say this, I was getting a little tired of doing the same old thing every day at the radio station. I'd done it for 12 years for them. And so I was kind of ready for a change, and it just seemed like a cool thing to do, as nice as that radio station was. And we can talk more about some of that if you want to. But I got the call from our human resources director, Mark Pluchek here, and all that kind of thing, went through the interview process and came here in 2017, we're looking at now, is when I first started here in the IT department, working for my good friend Mitch, and there was some concern here as to how that was going to work out. Do you really want to have your friend working here? Is that going to, make an impact? Well, we made sure that it did not. And we were very successful with that. I have to say, we were very, very good about keeping work, and friendship. And I can really say that with a clear conscience.
It's hard.
Yeah, it is, but it wasn't for us. We just somehow knew that there were certain things about work you had to do, but then we could have fun later, and those were off the clock. So I did that until my health started deteriorating. We didn't talk about, and we don't have to, but had some health issues along the way. Had a torn aorta and a bunch of different things. So I'd been through a bunch of surgeries, especially when I was working at the radio station in South Georgia, where I ended up as my last radio job, at least for now. So I had some health issues, and I brought them, unfortunately, with me to a certain degree here in Omaha when I got here and did the work for Outlook, Nebraska. And it turned out that in 2019, I started feeling that the IT position was maybe more than I really could handle and could take on and do decently. I just felt I was letting the company down. I wasn't being a top performer, because IT, as you know, involves a lot of climbing under desks and getting in small places and climbing high ladders. And, if you're really good and really doing what you're supposed to do, there's a lot involved. And my health, I just didn't feel up to it. And this building is large, as you discovered when you came here.
I did.
And there's stairs and other things that we didn't traverse, but there are places you go, and if you're in IT, you're all over the building. I just knew I just couldn't really deal with that as much as it bothered me. I didn't like it, but I knew I just wasn't giving them my all. So I voluntarily retired in 2019, and I had a couple of years where nobody called me at all, several years, I think about 4 or 5, something like that. And all of a sudden I get a call again from aforementioned Mark Pluchek, and he said, we've lost some people in our training department. One of our training people has unfortunately passed away, which I was sad about anyway. And we don't have anybody to train, and we've got these clients that need training. Would you be willing to come in and maybe spend a few weeks or a couple months or whatever we need? It's all stuff you did IT here, so you'd be actually now training people.
Wow.
So that's how I got in here, and that's how I got very familiar with Outlook and the mission. I know we don't have unlimited time, so that's kind of the short version.
Well, I'm glad you kind of brought that up, actually, because that was something that I was wondering too when you came to work here. So coming back to work here, now you're more involved with what actually is the day-to-day and what's going on with Outlook, right? The mission of it and the people. What were your thoughts, and like what I guess what stood out? Was there something that drew you? You're like, I really want to be part of this.
Yeah, I came and interviewed here, and before I ever took the position, they gave me plenty of chances to say no if I chose that. But I just saw the camaraderie, and I hear so many people in interviews that I do say, and I certainly noticed all those things. The camaraderie here, the great atmosphere, the sense of humor that goes on here, and the mission itself is so fantastic, helping blind people. And I think of my struggles and my fights and my pounding on doors at different radio stations and other jobs as well. I think of all that kind of stuff, and I just go, I can totally relate to that kind of feeling and wanting to be successful. And Outlook is certainly about that. When you walk in these doors, they want and expect you to be professional and successful, and those kind of people are really going to go somewhere, and they promote that very heavily here. So I was very impressed with the situation I found when I came here.
Right. You and working with the clients themselves too. What does your day look like? I guess, and before I get too far into that, what goes on?
Well, it's changed a lot, because when I first came back here, when I got that call from Mark and he said, "Can you come back and train people?" I was in the physically in the training department, where I was literally bringing folks in and either doing it on, in person or on the phone, and training them on various pieces of technology that we use here and use in our daily lives and all that kind of thing. All those questions that you would have, for example, about JAWS or Braille displays or iPhones or Android phones or any of that kind of thing. I had a client, whether it be by phone or in person, that I was working with and showing them how to use the equipment or whatever it is, or helping them, as best I could with other things as well. Some of them not even job related, but trying to help them get through situations. But now my job looks very different. I come in about once a month and spend about a week here, usually 3 or 4 days, doing a series of podcasts. And I ask, all just like you're doing with me today, I ask all the different questions, and then I do all the editing on the podcast. I put everything together so that each month when you folks hear the podcasts on the website, it's all the work is done and everybody's interviewed and we're ready to go. So my day is not in some ways it's very people oriented because I'm still seeing people, but I'm not training anymore and doing those kinds of things. So it's in some ways more relaxing, and yet I'm still very much working. And as you know, from editing and doing radio things, that in itself can be quite taxing.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. And for most, when they listen to a podcast and when it's done well, it seems very easy.
Yeah.
And that's how you're doing a good job.
And that's what you want.
Yeah. You want it to look like it's just a snap.
Right.
And to feel like it's just a snap, so they don't even consider all the work that went into it, because listening to sound quality even, and I know I don't want to get too far in the weeds in some of the stuff, but it's never a problem until it is.
Right.
Nobody says, wow, this sounds really good. They will say, oh God, this sounds terrible. And you want to make sure that you don't give them any opportunity to be disappointed.
And with you interviewing me, people could say, gosh, that Jill was a nice person, but she was all distorted, and why didn't you turn her volume down, and things like that. So those are the things I'm always listening for. Even though you're interviewing me, I'm still doing the podcast thing, because last I heard you weren't going to stick around to help me edit. So.
You still do the work in your head no matter what. You can't
Exactly.
You can't get away from that.
No, you can't. You can't. When you've done radio, and you know this, when you've done radio, it's just a part of you. And radio it was an obsession with me. It was an absolute obsession. And I could, and it was certainly my dream job. And the one thing I want to make sure I sneak in here before we get away from ourselves and whatever is that once again, by doing these podcasts here at Outlook, Nebraska, where I never expected, as I told you earlier when I came here, I said, well, I'm going to be leaving radio behind. I'm never going to be behind a microphone other than what I do at the house or those kinds of things. Again, my days are done. And once again, while working here at Outlook and doing training, the opportunity came up because businesses have been talking with Outlook a long time about you need to get your story out. You need to do a podcast.
Yep.
They don't have anybody to do a podcast. And then they thought about it for a minute. They said, wait, yes, we do. And so I got that invitation. And so once again, here at Outlook, I am, once again, in its own way, living my dream one more time. And here I am behind the microphone doing all these sort of radio-related things, even though, as you've talked about, too, a podcast isn't a radio broadcast, very different. And for one thing, you don't have to be quite as formatted and all the rest of it. But by the same token, it's still putting, Outlook's best foot forward. In a way, it's more pressure because this is not my podcast. This is the company's podcast. And that's how I always look at it, by the way.
It's so true, because once you put this out there, the beauty of it is that then it's ready anytime anybody is looking for the information about Outlook. And so it's out there and it's always ready and waiting to be played to help someone else understand or bring them closer to understanding what the mission is and what is going on here. And it's like they say, you are probably one of their best assets when it comes to talking to people about the mission of Outlook and what they do. But you can only be so many places in a day.
That's right.
And by doing this, it's replicated and people become accustomed to hearing your voice and understanding what, kind of get a feel for how things work.
Right.
And it probably makes it easier too before people come in for the first time or reach out for the first time. Maybe they've gotten a chance to hear a few of these episodes and they feel a little more familiar and like they're kind of know what's going on a little bit more than walking in cold.
Yeah, absolutely. And it beats just reading a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's nice. Everybody can put up a website and have all kinds of material out there that you can sift through, but this is real people, real voices, folks talking about their experiences. That's what makes this fun.
Let me ask you just to step back for a second.
Sure.
So we talk about Outlook 25 years. So was there anything at all like this that was available prior to your knowledge as far as that you could reach out? I mean, I know there were schools and there were, places that were trying to help those that were visually impaired or blind. But I think the mission here and the people here, it just seems much more proactive.
Well, it is. I think it is. And they did do some podcasting. What they used to do is people used to have to go over to the radio talking book service.
Oh, there you go.
Offered here.
That's right.
And they would record their podcast. Well, then this great idea, along with everything else, came along where they said, if we had it here, we can bring all the resources here and we don't have to traipse over there. And they did a wonderful job for us for years. They were awesome. And I'm good friends with Ryan that takes care of things over there and does a fantastic job. And that was nice. But here, by having everything in-house here, we can oftentimes get even more access to people that are of immediate interest to us. And we don't have to, work with their format and protocol and all that. So no love-hate thing there or anything like that. I still, I'd be happy to do things for Ryan if he needs it, but he'll call me if he does. By the same token, I'm very, very happy to be doing things here where we have access to folks and things that are directly related to the company.
I like just the concept of the history of how things have changed. And for a long time, they stayed the same for a very long time. And it seems like in the 80s, 90s, that's when things accelerated.
I think so, yeah.
Right? And Radio Talking Book, do you know how far back that goes?
Actually, let me think about this for a minute. Radio Talking Book went on the air for the first time in 1974. They celebrated their 50th anniversary this past October in 2024. So as we're doing this podcast, they have been around now. They're working on their 51st year of being on the air, serving the print handicapped of the area.
You know what? You might be right because I remember people that I knew that volunteered before radio days, before my radio. I was a kid even.
Yeah.
To go read the newspaper.
Yeah.
To go, and make it available to people. People would tune in to listen, to hear the different programs, but I don't remember exactly how it was formatted. Obviously, I never tuned it in.
Sure.
But that was probably one of the few assets that people could turn to that were experiencing vision loss or were blind and waiting for technology to catch up. And obviously, thankfully, that was paid attention to as the computer age came in the 80s and started kind of changing everything. I remember we got our first computer at the radio station and it was a closed circuit. It wasn't internet, but we had about 25 radio stations in the country that were all on the same intranet.
And yep.
So we could talk to each other and we could send files to each other, not pictures, all printed.
Yeah.
But and I think, wow, and so much has happened so quickly since then that there's no surprise that you have this kind of technology now. So if you meet somebody or if you wanted to put some words out to somebody that maybe their experience is new, like they're just now trying to navigate the waters for themselves or for someone else in their family, how Outlook Nebraska can help them, or what direction would you send somebody where do you start?
Well, it depends, number one, on what they want to do. And that's the first thing that I always, even in training, I did a lot more of this kind of thing where I would talk to people, find out what they were all about. What are they interested in? What do they want to do? For example, if I found out that someone was interested in doing podcasting, I'd obviously say, well, let's start here because we do that and I can show you how that works and you can see if it's for you kind of thing. But yeah, whenever possible, obviously, I try to direct blind and visually impaired folks especially, or people who know them and that sort of thing. I try to direct them here because it's a wonderful resource right here in Omaha. And for a lot of people, that's a big deal. If you're in this area, it's fantastic. And we do a lot of things out of state as well. When I was training, I talked to people as far away as Florida and Georgia and places like that. So with our phone training that we do in the training department,
you can be in the room with anyone.
Right. We
anywhere.
reach out all over. So it isn't just Omaha anymore. But certainly if you're in this area, come here and take a look because you talk about opportunities for anyone who's blind or visually impaired. This is the place that's got them.
Without a doubt.
In fact, just to touch on something that you didn't, as much as all this computer technology and everything is great and I'm all over it, one of the sad things that I want to comment on a little bit is in radio itself. Unfortunately, I thought as we progressed and got all this technology, radio would get easier and easier for blind people to do. Mm-hmm. But as far as a radio job, would I recommend radio to anybody now? I sound a lot like my parents, except that my parents, they came at it differently. They didn't like radio people. They didn't like modern radio people that we would listen to, They never would, for example, listen to Sweet 98. They just wouldn't do it because they didn't like the more modern approach. So they said no for those reasons. I would say no because the technology has advanced so much. When I was growing up and working to get into broadcasting, I dealt with people. I went to radio stations, hung out with disc jockeys and people doing the work. Now, what am I going to do? Go hang out and watch the computer do the work, and they're not going to give me access to the programming.
Yes, that's the thing. I think a lot of people don't realize, maybe more realize it now than ever, but that a lot of radio stations, there are no bodies in the building. In the studio. No. And everything is piped in.
And they're tracked from, there's some guy in St. Louis or KC or just to name a couple of places somewhere that's, tracking and probably doing it for like 70 radio stations at a time. It's all different now than it used to be. Yeah. Not that there aren't some exceptions, and that's what you'd have to look for. But boy, I'll tell you, that looking is a lot harder. And I could tell you the story about how I, used to go around to different radio stations. And one time in the middle of winter in central Wisconsin, I went to a radio station to try and get a job there, and I got lost. I couldn't find the station. It was snowing. It was real snowy. It was a blizzard. And I got lost, and I just got so frustrated that I went and sat in a snowbank for a half an hour.
Oh, my gosh.
Stupid, but, I was just so frustrated and that was way back then when they did need people, but they weren't sure if they were going to take me and that kind of thing. So it's always a battle regardless. Yeah. But, now it's real hard to get into any kind of broadcasting. So I feel like I'm a very, very lucky human being that it ever even happened to me, especially being blind.
Well, I say, too, that a lot of the people here and the people that you work with and for and help, they're lucky that you've had all the experiences that you've had because you bring so much to the table.
Certainly give it a try.
Certainly
try.
You do. You bring a lot. Like just listening to your story, and we've just scratched the surface, right? Really, and not really gotten into great detail, but you can tell there's a lot of experience there. And so people that are looking for help or that want to support the mission.
Absolutely.
I think it's valuable that they understand how much you're bringing to the table as well, that if somebody wants to support the mission, let's just go down that road for a second. Sure. How would they do that? How would, what's needed? What's the best way?
Well, the best thing to do is I think for starters, is to visit our website at www.outlook.com. because that's where a lot of the fundraising and things are done with Outlook Enrichment. We're divided up into several companies. I never know quite how to explain it. I've had people in here that have explained it, and they do this great job. I'm not doing it quite that justice, but we're three separate entities, Outlook Nebraska, Outlook Enrichment, and Outlook Properties, which, so we have three different things that we do here, but really the place for the average person to go is www.outlooken, which stands for enrichment.org, and that's where most of the major, fundraising occurs and that kind of thing. And those are the programs that can use the fundraising. So if you visit the website, you can see a lot of what we do. And as so many people in my interviews say, if you really want to know and really want to get close and personal, come for a tour. We're happy to have people come through for a tour, and that's where you get to really see the people at Outlook, see what we're doing, see what it's all about. You're getting to experience the podcast, the palatial podcast studio, as I always call it.
It's beautiful.
It is neat. I mean,
do.
For a podcast studio, no, it doesn't look like your average radio station, but they've done a good job here of setting this up.
Yep. It is. It's just, this is phenomenal. I'm so impressed with everything, and I've just seen the walk through as we came back and we were talking about it, as we were walking back. You were going in through the chambers, and we get more and more isolated and insulated, and it's a perfect place to do this podcast. So that was thoughtful that they did that. And you were talking about the fundraising. I know they have some very ambitious goals for things that you're all wanting to accomplish, and so yes, the fundraising is really important. And I saw the meter on there showing where we're at on the year and what kind of fundraising. I know you've got some things coming up throughout the year for fundraising, and I really look forward to seeing what comes next.
Yeah, absolutely. The capital campaign is in full swing, as we like to call it around here. And that's very important to any organization to have, obviously, an influx. And we want people to know that their donations truly are appreciated by everyone who is here. Whether they will tell you that in person or not, we're always grateful when someone does take the time and energy to donate. I've even had people that I have worked with, clients that I have worked with, that were impressed enough with the work that I did with them that they suddenly would say, I want to donate. I want to help you people. I need,
awesome.
I want to buy something for your training department that you need or whatever. And
that speaks highly of you. Well, that speaks highly of what you're willing to put forward. And I think that's probably common of most of the people that work here.
In that sense, everybody's the same. And everybody that you talk to around here will always put their best foot forward for anybody who's here visiting. We love, having tours come through because it's a chance for people to see what goes on here.
Do you have school kids come through?
Yes. They have bus.
Great idea.
And they also have, major bus tours come through here with all kinds of people that are taking a bus tour of Nebraska, and
nice.
we're on the docket, that kind of thing. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah, we had one of those come through yesterday, and a lot of folks, and it's always fun, and it gives us a chance to meet some folks too. So works both ways.
Well, I certainly applaud you and the other people that I personally know that are here. Look forward to meeting more of the people and learning more as we continue on this relationship, which is really awesome. I'm going to give back your interviewer hat, but I want to remind you that we do still have a special listening present, a gift coming up, because you're going to include some of the audio from your commercial work.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so don't miss that. But I have learned so much sitting here talking with you, and would love to do a continuation sometime. You are a great person to interview.
Well, thank you so much, Jill. And I appreciated meeting you as well and learning about your radio connection, which right there gives us something in common, just that.
Yes.
So that's always cool. And it's great having you here. And I couldn't have been interviewed by a nicer person. So,
well, thank you.
How do you like that?
I like that. I didn't even script that.
No, that's not in the. Good job.
You bet. bet.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming by. And you made my interviewing today very easy, so appreciate that.
Deal. That's a goal.
All right. We will talk to you real soon. And again, real pleasure to meet you. Well, I certainly hope you enjoyed that interview with Jill as much as I enjoyed her turning the tables on me and interviewing me. That was kind of fun. I guess what we're going to do in my portion of the interview here is show you some of those promised samples of my radio career, the path that I took to get where I am today, and the part that includes broadcasting. So to do that, we're going to start, as I mentioned in the interview, in high school. And I was signing on the high school radio station. It was a closed circuit radio station. It was a carrier current transmitter. And you'll hear me signing the radio station on and trying to sound like this big important announcer person. And here I am, just a sophomore in high school, trying to make this all happen. And I think you'll find that interesting as well. So I take you back to 1974 for this sample of me signing the high school radio station on the air for the first time under our new management, with me as what nowadays would be called the program director of this radio station at the time.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the veteran broadcast of WCRV AM 1610 on your AM dial. WCRV radio is owned and operated by students at the Wisconsin School for Visually Handicapped. WCRV FM has been operating for some time, since middle October, with some fine results, and now with the AM we should have some improved results as time goes on. We hope you'll stay with us for our format of AM programming, and just in case, just for posterity's sake, of course, don't forget this, the 12th of March, 74, when we began our broadcasting. My name is Dennis Nelson, and some of the people you'll be hearing on the WCRV station include Jerry Mako, Todd Repke, myself, Mike Dukin, and anyone else that just happens to wander on in and out of the side. So I think that pretty well covers everything that we have to say right now. And in just a matter of seconds here, we will get into some music of some type or another. We're so prepared.
Well, certainly not the highest quality file by any means, but at least that was preserved. You can hear that carrier current humming through the transmitter as we're trying to broadcast. But the station did have a signal. Granted, if you were any distance from our main signal, which was very weak that we did send out, you had to plug a radio into the school's electrical current to get us any distance away. But it did work, and we tolerated that humming and all that fun stuff back then. But things got a little more serious after I left high school and went on to the UW Stevens Point that I talked about earlier in my interview. Of course, I brought all my radio interests along there, and it wasn't long before I was involved in the university's radio station, WWSP 90 FM, we called it, at 89.9 on the FM dial. But back then you would always try to kind of shorten it up. We always called it 90 FM. Great radio station, and some wonderful people there that taught me a lot. I got to do some things there, including consumer reports that I did once a week. It was a pre-recorded show, and I'd often go out and ask people all kinds of consumer questions and read all kinds of consumer articles, and it was a lot of fun. But the biggest thing I got to do at the school radio station, in this case the university radio station, was that I got to take over a show that had been done by a lot of great folks prior to me, called Two-Way Radio, and it was a talk show. Great name for a talk show, by the way. And I got to run that every Monday night. Was it 1 or 2 semesters? I can't remember now. Some of those little details escape me. Don't have any samples of that. I used to have some, but I don't know where they have gone off to, so I don't have those for you. So we'll skip to the next portion of my journey because while doing things for the university radio station, I still wanted to get into commercial radio. And one of the biggest things I can tell you as a tip as far as getting into radio, and this was a lot easier to do back in the early days, as we also touched on in the earlier portion of this interview that Jill did with me, is there were people around at that time, and I could contact people. I would go hang out, as I mentioned in that interview, with DJs that were doing their thing on these different radio stations, and I was constantly calling their request lines and chatting with them and getting to know them, and that is so important, or was, at least when I was trying to get into radio, as you're about to find out here, because I hung out with people at the local commercial radio station, which is really where I wanted to be anyway, and if not that one, at least something like it. And I hung out with folks that were there, and I got to know a fellow by the name of Fred Thomas. And Fred Thomas understood my needs and my wants to be in radio and all that kind of thing. And back then, the way to do it, or at least one of the ways, was to produce a sample of what you might sound like if someone was to hire you. Well, that's easy once you're in and actually working on the job at a radio station, but until you're there, that's not such an easy thing to accomplish. Well, it was for me because I had my good friend Fred Thomas, who one day after his shift on the air himself in the afternoon, he said, I'll come back to the station and bring you with me, and we can put together a sample of what you would sound like if someone would hire you, so that when you submit your resume and your cover letter, since you're always trying to put your best foot forward when you're looking for a job, you can also submit a sample of what you would sound like on the air if they hire you. And that was considered a big deal back then. You always brought along what they call an air check of yourself. Now, the air check should be no longer than 2 to 3 minutes at most. That's pushing it, because they just want a quick sample. And usually my rule of thumb was to record the equivalent of 1 hour's worth of me being on the air with all the songs and extra commercials and things cut out, so that you just had the talking portion of 1 hour of you being on the radio, so they could hear how you introduced songs, how you came out of songs, how you went into commercial breaks, and that sort of thing. That's what a program director or any kind of a boss is looking for. How do you handle yourself on the air? So we did all those things, and my good friend Fred got me in the studio at WSPT Radio in Stevens Point, which was the commercial station. And he helped me put together this sample that I'm going to show you a small portion of. One of the many things he taught me while I was doing that sample was how to make my introductions to songs creative and interesting to the listener. So I wouldn't just be a time and temperature guy, or here's so-and-so, here's Jerry Rafferty doing Baker Street, and then maybe, just coming out of that and saying, that was Jerry Rafferty in Baker Street. I mean, you can say that, but you want to be creative in the way that you introduce or end your songs, if at all possible, especially back in those days, because you're entertaining people. That's what it was all about. And Fred did what he could at that time to show me how that was done. And here's a little tiny sample of what that effort sounded like. So no one heard this except people who I was sending this to try and get jobs elsewhere, since WSPT at that time had no openings for me. But we put this together so that I would have something to take to other radio stations, and here's what it sounds like.
WSPT, Stevens Point, 7 o'clock with Denny Reynolds. Music coming up this hour from Soft Cell, Dire Straits, Rod Stewart, ELO, plus your chance to be on the Party Patrol. Keep it on Stereo 98. WSPT with Denny Reynolds, who almost didn't make it into work tonight. You see, my car decided it was going to stall right in the middle of Michigan Avenue, but I was rescued. She was about 6'2", blonde hair. I've got my request lines wide open for you at 341-1700, toll free at 421-0000 from the Rapids, and by request off their album Abacab. Here's Genesis on Stereo 98. WSPT. I love that song a lot. That's Genesis and Abacab. Got a call from some folks out in the Rapids, and they love Donnie Iris. And he's coming up next on Stereo 98.
Listen, what?
At Dave's True Value Hardware.
Central Wisconsin weather. Cloudy and cool overnight. Low down to 13. Partly cloudy and a little warmer tomorrow. High of 38. Currently, it's 16. They say that love is like a rock. I wouldn't have any idea. From King Cool, this is Donnie Iris on Stereo 98.
Well, knowing myself as I do, I sounded a bit awkward, and you could tell I was in training for sure as I learned how to do those kinds of things, and that was my first exposure to some of that kind of thing where you were trying to be creative and all that stuff, and it was a lot of fun. I had another secret weapon on my side at that same radio station because not only did I know Fred Thomas, but I also knew the program director, and he was very, very important and a very, very important person to know at that time, especially in my career, because the program director was in charge of all the programming, as you may have figured out by now. And his name was Pat Martin, and he was a great program director and had quite a legend built up around him, and a lot of people will recognize that name if they're in broadcasting and possibly listening to this. He was well known in the Midwest and other parts of the country as well, and it was great to also know him. And his wife also happened to teach blind and visually impaired students in the Stevens Point school system. I can't talk. And also in the Portage County area, Portage County, Wisconsin, where Stevens Point was located. So that couldn't hurt either. And then this blind guy comes along, and so they kind of knew how to handle the whole situation between them and that sort of thing. And one of the many things that Pat Martin did for me, among many others, is that he allowed me to see a side of the business I otherwise might not have seen, and that was the program director's position and some of the things that he did. He would, for example, call me in sometimes to listen to music with him, and we would together, of course, he always had the upper hand, and rightfully so at that time, but he would let me listen to records and get my reaction to songs that he was going to program for the radio station over the upcoming weeks and that kind of thing. And that was something I may not have gotten to see firsthand until I was really in the business, but I had a little jump in that area, and that was one of the many neat things about knowing Pat, besides just his personality and the fact we got along well anyway. One of the many other things that Pat did for me was he also made some phone calls on my behalf, especially once I had that sample that you just heard under my belt. And he, among other phone calls that I probably don't even know about, he made one to a fella named Roger Ootnamer. And you're probably saying, who's that? Well, Roger Ootnamer was the owner of a radio station about 60 miles northeast of us at that time. And he owned WRLO, WATK in Antigo, Wisconsin, about 60 miles away. And somehow Pat convinced Roger to hire me. Still don't quite know how that all happened. I did have to go up there on the back of a motorcycle for an interview. That's a story in and of itself. And I interviewed to do telemarketing for WRLO, WATK in Antigo. Not exactly what I wanted to do, but even back then I was being told, and I could see the value of maybe doing it for a while, hoping that maybe sometime I could get on the air. And that's indeed what happened. To shorten this up a bit, I ended up getting moved up there. Roger was a very, very nice person to me as well. And he sent his morning man, Lauren Haraldson, down to pick me up and essentially moved me from Stevens Point up to Antigo. And Roger also owned the property next door to his home in Antigo, and therefore could afford to rent to me the upstairs portion of the property he owned next door. So not only did Roger give me a job, but he gave me a place to live. And I telemarketed for the station for about a month and a half or something like that. And then Roger decided that maybe I really did want to be on the air and I really didn't want to do telemarketing. And I'm sure that's how it came down. And I am forever grateful to him for that. And I got a job up in Antigo, Wisconsin, actually doing the overnight shift for starters on WRLO radio, which was the more powerful of the two stations. WRLO had 100,000 watts of power, actually 50,000 more watts than the radio station you just heard, WSPT. But that's neither here nor there. But they did have a very powerful signal, and it was really fun working there and learning the overnight shift from the guy who was doing overnights and then got moved to afternoons. And that goes on a lot in the broadcasting business. You never know for sure what shift you're going to be doing in many cases. And certainly for that overnight guy, he got moved to afternoons, I think, a little quicker than even he wanted to have that happen. But he taught me well. And I was soon doing the overnights on WRLO, which involved running a syndicated program back then called The Larry King Show, which meant that I had a lot of time to myself at the radio station, which led me down the path of audio production. We started to learn that my real gift to the radio station wasn't so much my air work. I mean, that was okay, but especially on WRLO, it was run pretty much like a glorified, beautiful music station, which used to be very popular at that time in the radio business. We played a little more modern music, but it still wasn't my cup of tea overall. I thought it was we used to kiddingly call it kind of a mushy format. It was soft rock, and I didn't care for it. I really wanted to rock and roll. And I started to learn that production was going to be my strong point, even at WRLO and WATK radio. A little more on that coming up. But before we got to that point, I went into the production room one night and recorded another one of these fake, I guess you could call them, tapes that I wanted to send out to radio stations more to my liking and more to what I wanted to do. Because in radio, one of the things, you're kind of a wandering nomad when you're in this business. And as much as I liked WRLO, WATK, and they were very good to me, I just wasn't real happy with the music on the FM. And I couldn't see myself running the Larry King Show for the rest of my life either. So like anybody, I started looking around, or at least feeling out sources to maybe try and find something else. So in an effort to do that, I brought in my own rock and roll records and put together a little sample of what I would actually like to sound like, which never really happened in real life, but it did give me a chance to put together my own very first recording that I did from start to finish. I didn't have the expert guidance of Fred Thomas there at this point. I just had to figure it out on my own. So I put together this little sample that I'll just show you a short sample of. And this is my next attempt to try and get that next job in the radio business.
Hot Hits 105 FM is WRLO FM, Antigo, Crandon, Rhinelander. It's 6 o'clock.
Dennis Nelson's Ear Raid on Hot Hits 105 FM.
Woo! Hope you got the wax clean on them tonight, baby, because I got all kinds of good stuff on the way for you. Music from Quiet Riot, The Eurythmics, Romantics, and more. Also, the boss loosened up his purse strings today. Said I can give away a $100 bill before midnight. We'll also have the flame-throwing 5 at 9. Hot Hits 105 FM. Woo! Am I hot to track tonight, baby? The Ear Raid is on with Dennis Nelson and wide open music lines for your hitline requests at 623-4124. Also going to play Dial a Joke, and it's worth mellow yellow t-shirts tonight. We'll do that later on this hour from Hot Hits 105 FM. Out on the streets. Hot Hits 105 FM. New stuff from Riot called Round and Round. Kind of sounds like our staff meetings here at the Home of the Heads. Enough on that subject. Hey, this is Dennis Nelson at 611, and I want to see you tomorrow in front of the Rhinelander Dairy Queen. I'm going to be right there in the front seat of the Hot Hits band with all kinds of Hot Hits t-shirts along with Mellow Yellow t-shirts, some Hot Hits albums for you, and also 6-packs of Mellow Yellow. It's all going on in front of the Rhinelander Dairy Queen. I want to see you there. Another fun promotion from Hot Hits 105 FM.
I think my boss of today would actually kill for me to have that kind of energy here in the office. But anyway, that was a tape that I tried to make, another fake one that I sent out to places trying to get jobs. And that was the kind of job I was really interested in getting. And that's kind of what I wanted to sound like at that particular point in my career. My career did not end up going that way, but it was a fun try. And it's a fun thing to listen back to and to make fun of now and that sort of thing. But as I continued working in Antigo, again, we started to figure out that my favorite place in many cases was the production room. And I'm going to let you hear the first of what I like to call my 2 signature commercials that I did. I started wanting to learn how to put together commercials, like I talked about in an earlier portion of this interview. And my big reason for wanting to do that was that I felt that when the copy allowed for it, I could maybe create very, very cool sounding, realistic sounding commercials. And I might be more attuned to that kind of thing than the average sighted person, if you will. And I did that with this first of my 2 signature commercials that I'm going to let you hear. And you'll hear how I went out of my way to put lots of sound effects into what I'm doing. Now, this one, too, is old, and it's been copied and recopied many times. Certainly doesn't sound like the high school radio station, but it isn't the absolute greatest quality. But I think even from this, you'll understand what I was trying to do in putting together a commercial that really, in a sound way, made you picture building a big potato, which is what this commercial is all about. So let's take a listen to it and see what you think.
You're about to hear the construction of a big potato lunch at Steamax of Anago. In Steamax parking lot is a huge, and I mean huge, potato. Men with chainsaws are finished cutting it open, and the peeling has been squeezed back. Now, tank trucks are prepared to squirt a mound of delicious topping in the steaming potato. Oh, here comes corned beef. What a spectacle. Steamax has other taste-tempting combinations. Crab and cheddar, scallops and chicken, beef or ham, all heaped on a big potato. Come out to Steamax for lunch today. See and taste a big potato. Corned beef, ham, or beef big potato, only $2.50 at Steamax on Superior Street in Anago. Have Steamax construct a big potato for you today.
Well, now I'm going to let you hear a sample of an actual air check that actually helped me get a job later on down the line. It's a little mellower than what you've heard in the past here because, as I said, my screaming, rockin' career never quite went that way. But here is an air check that actually got heard by the people of Antigo who listened to our AM station, WATK. Now, WATK was only 250 watts of power and served the immediate Antigo area. So I wasn't getting the coverage that I did when I worked on the FM station, but I did serve the local folks in Antigo, and they certainly enjoyed the programming, and we probably went about maybe 10 or 20 miles either side of Antigo, and at least reliably. But this is an actual air check that I made of myself since I was getting a job in Antigo now. I could do these kinds of things and produce my own recordings, and so I recorded some of my shows on WATK radio because shortly after I did the big potato commercial, an opening became available on the AM station, and once again, good old Roger said, why don't you fill that opening until we get someone else in to permanently do that, and then we're probably going to put you back on the overnight shift, but at least in between, why don't you try this morning thing and see if you can do anything with it. And I had a lot of fun playing records on WATK radio, and I'm going to let you hear this entire sample of WATK because it'll give you the very good idea of the kind of thing that you want to show to a prospective employer if you're putting together a sample of yourself. And this will definitely, if you pay attention to the time checks that are given throughout this, you'll hear that it is 1 hour of my program, but we take out the actual commercials and songs since the radio stations already have the records and that kind of thing. So I'm going to let you hear this in its entirety, and you can take a listen and see what you think of this particular air check that was sent out to a number of different radio stations, and it actually did help me get another job down the line that we'll get to very shortly.
This is meteorologist Jerry Mullen.
Right now, cloudy and 58 degrees in Antigo at your weather station, WATK. 900 AM WATK. Good morning. That's the new one from Emmy Lou Harris, In My Dreams. Time to stop dreaming now. It's 14 after 7, and I'm Dennis Nelson with lots of good music coming up before 8.
Open till 5:30 weekdays.
WATK 900 AM. Good morning. 27 after 7. Take along an umbrella. Satellite weather calling for cloudy skies and maybe a chance for a possible shower or thunder shower before the day's out. High getting up to 72. Right now it's a nice warm 59 in Antigo at your weather station, WATK. WATK, good morning. It's 9 minutes before 8. The Antigo Area Chamber of Commerce could use some help in setting up some floats for their annual 4th of July picnic going on out at Athletic Park. If you think you could help them out, call 623-5984 for more info.
Someone somewhere.
900 AM, WATK. That's the new one from Conway Twitty. Somebody somewhere's got to be waiting for me. News and information awaiting you in just 5 minutes here on WATK. And even if the sun won't, George Jones is going to shine on before 8, right here at your home in the country, WATK.
We're here talking to people about their backaches.
Price excludes tax, title, and license.
WATK. It's 7:56, and coming up in just 4 minutes, we'll have a complete look at news, weather, sports, and all the ag news you need to know on WATK's 8 o'clock report. Musically, we'll be hearing from George Strait, John Conley, and Deborah Allen.
She'll never grace the centerfold.
Boy, they sure don't make them like that anymore, do they? Technically, this is where my broadcasting career should have ended, but as you'll find out, life threw me a couple of more curveballs along that path, I'm happy to say. But let me share a story with you that happened to me regarding that air check that you just heard. I sent that country music air check to a radio station in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and this is one of those stories where you don't want to do what I did. It was fine that I sent along the sample along with my resume and cover letter. That was all great. And the program director in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, did get back to me. But his response, as much as I liked parts of it, also annoyed me. And I didn't show anything to him over the phone or anything like that. But what I did do is that I listened to it. He said in response to my country music air check that I sounded a bit youthful. In other words, we're not going to hire you. And he listed about 3 radio stations in the area that I might want to send something to and see if they would possibly consider such a thing. Well, that response made me angry because especially at the time, I thought he was just not hiring me maybe because of my blindness or whatever. And who knows? I don't know what the reason was, and it doesn't really matter anymore. But I did the unthinkable thing. I went ahead and created another sample for him, but the mistake that I made, and the one you don't want to make, is that I tried to imitate the guy. I know it's embarrassing to talk about now, and I'd never do it again, but I tried to imitate this fellow who had one of these, stereotypical low radio voices, and it was one of the worst air checks I ever did. And it's not a mistake you want to repeat. So keep that in mind as we travel down this career path together. Always be yourself when you're producing a sample, no matter what. And don't try to impress anybody, because I'm sure that did everything but impress that fella, and I never did work in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And I'm sure as a result of that is probably part of the case there. Well, shortly after doing that air check, I would say about 3 or 4 months later, I left WATK WRLO. And that's when I started doing some of the other things that we've already talked about, like running the coffee shop, working for the cable company, and working at Freedom Scientific and things like that. And it was while I was at the cable company that I indirectly met a fellow named Gary Stevens. Now, Gary Stevens was a gentleman who was dating a gal that I was training to work at the cable company in the customer service department where I worked. Obviously, being another blind person, as this gal was, they wanted me to train her so that I could show her how a blind person would do the job and all that kind of thing. It all made sense. Well, her boyfriend at that time was this Gary Stevens, and his name will come up in just a couple of minutes here. I promptly tended to forget about him after I met him. We talked a little shop. He was another radio freak like me, and he liked doing radio and all that sort of thing, and so we talked a bit, and I promptly, like I say, pretty much forgot about him. And I went on to do all those other things. One of the other things that I did is I started a sideline business, and at the time I called it D&N Audio Productions. It's kind of like what Jill talked about in her portion of the interview, where she mentioned that she started a podcast production company helping people create podcasts. Well, there was no such thing as podcasts back when I started mine. So my emphasis was on commercials and answering machine messages and voicemail greetings and things like that people might want. And I was also going after low-budget radio stations and really anybody that would, give me $5 for what I was doing, that kind of thing. But we had a lot of fun with that. And later in Florida, when I brought the business to Florida, again, that name Mitch Green comes up, our IT manager here now. He helped me in Florida develop 2 websites. One was called livestreamamerica.com, where we did what would now be considered podcasting. It wasn't called that at that time. We were way ahead of our time in that regard. But that's where we produced a lot of programs. We had one called Radio and Production, the fun side that I hosted, and we had another show called The Rock Vaults, and Mitch did a show called America Out Loud, and it was a lot of fun. And I'm missing some other shows along the way, but we had a whole plethora of programs, essentially podcasts, that people could tune into. Well, as a sideline to that, Mitch also was the webmaster for the Audio Production Den, which is what we ended up calling my business when I got to Florida. Much easier to remember and pronounce and all that kind of thing. So yes, at one time there was a website, theaudioproductiondens.com. Neither site exists anymore, and we got out of all of that, but it was fun at the time, and it attracted a lot of folks. One of the things that I did while I was doing the audio production thing out of my home is that I dabbled a little bit in jingle creation. Now, obviously, I couldn't do what the big jingle companies at the time were doing, but I did the very best that I could from a home standpoint. And again, I was mostly trying to appeal to low-budget radio stations and places like that might be able to use jingles and other things that we did. Well, there was such a radio station. It was a little licensed 10-watt radio station that served Lakewood, Colorado, run by another radio freak, much like me. That's what we like to call ourselves back in the day. And his name was John Knight. And this is a top-of-the-hour station ID that I produced for John and his radio station back in the day.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to John Knight on the radio station where the 60s, 70s, and 80s never sounded better. We're the Tiger.
93.1 KTJR Lakewood.
Well, that jingle was one of the many things that our production company at the time did, and I hope you enjoyed hearing that. Along with that, I was working at Freedom Scientific, and this was all a sideline for me besides the job I was doing for Freedom Scientific. And it was while doing the Freedom Scientific thing and running this production company that I heard from Gary Stevens. That name comes up again. This time his wife actually called me, and she was inquiring about production that maybe I could do for him, and could I possibly sell him some of my production music that I had. Turns out that Gary had gotten a job at WMTM in Moultrie, Georgia. The station was known as Cruisin' 94, and it was basically just up the road 150 miles or so from me in the Tampa Bay area where Freedom Scientific was located. We got to talking, and eventually Gary had a brilliant idea. He said, if you worked up here, you'd bring your whole production library up here, and you might be able to help us out on a full-time basis if I can help convince people here that you'd be a good fit and all that kind of thing. So one thing led to another, and I left Freedom Scientific in 2006 after going up to the radio station in Moultrie for an interview on Labor Day weekend. So I left in October and started at WMTM Radio. In fact, my first show on the radio was October 31st, Halloween of all things, of 2006. When I got to WMTM, I heard a commercial running on the air, and I do want to thank my good friend Phil Kitchen, a real good buddy of mine up in Minneapolis, who loved anything to do with my career and so forth. He has an entire hard drive dedicated to my Cruisin' 94 career at WMTM in Moultrie, Georgia, and it came in very handy because what I'm about to show you I couldn't find. I have it backed up somewhere, but he had it right on his machine and was able to get it to me in time for this podcast, so I'm deeply indebted to you, Phil, for that. This is a commercial that I heard when I first came to Moultrie, and I'm going to let you go ahead and listen to it, and then I'll explain the rest of the story after it. It'll sound like just your basic, average, normal commercial, and that's exactly what it is.
This year, don't pay more for your Hilton Head Island vacation. If you're trying to find a perfect vacation rental on Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, call Hilton Head Accommodations for an island-wide selection of rental homes and villas. Many of our accommodations come with free bicycles, tennis and golf greens fees, and wireless internet access. Our vacation counselors at Hilton Head Accommodations are extremely knowledgeable about the area and will help you find the perfect home or villa for your needs and budget. And if we don't have it, we'll find someone who does. So this year, don't waste a lot of money or time. Call Hilton Head Accommodations at 800-444-4772 and let us do the work so you can start enjoying. Call 800-444-4772 or visit our website at www.hiltonheadusa.com. That's www.hiltonheadusa.com and vacation on Hilton Head for less. Hilton Head Accommodations, 800-444-4772.
I think it is important to point out here that by this time, 2006, the internet was a pretty common thing, and I was using it quite readily, and I think the radio station wanted to test me to a certain degree to see if they really got all the production whiz that they were looking for and all that sort of thing. So shortly after arriving and hearing that very nicely produced commercial, they asked me if I could maybe take a second look at it and maybe rewrite and reproduce it and put it out over the air. Well, I did all those things, and we talked about this earlier. I was always big on bringing things to life. So I want you to listen to my version of this commercial, which I call my second signature commercial. I have two of them. The one you heard about the big potato lunch, and this one that I think really highlight my commercial or production careers, or career, if you will, very nicely. And I want you to listen to this Hilton Head that I did and see what you think of it in comparison to the one that you just heard.
Don't pay more for your Hilton Head Island vacation. If you're trying to find a perfect vacation rental on Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, call Hilton Head Accommodations for an island-wide selection of rental homes and villas. Many accommodations come with amenities like free bicycles, tennis and golf greens fees, and wireless internet access. The vacation counselors at Hilton Head Accommodations know the area and will help you find the perfect home or villa for your needs and budget. If they don't
have it, they'll find someone who does. In other words, they'll do all the work so you can come and enjoy the fun. So don't waste a lot of money or time. Call Hilton Head Accommodations at 800-444-4772. That's 800-444-4772. Or visit their website at www.hiltonheadusa.com. That's www.hiltonheadusa.com. And vacation on Hilton Head for less. Hilton Head Accommodations, 800-444-4772, or on the web, www.hiltonheadusa.com.
Well, here's hoping you enjoyed hearing that commercial as much as I enjoyed doing it at the time, and that copy just lent itself so much to all the things I value with production as far as the sound effects and making it sound as realistic and vacation-y in this case as possible. And I had a lot of fun with that. All right, time for a sample of my actual on-air work at WMTM Cruisin' 94. And what I'm going to do is let you hear the first break that I took on my show, and this is my last show that I did on the radio station. So here you get to hear me in my prime. I've been doing this for them for 12 years. This is now 2017, and this is the first break of my very last show for the radio station. So I'll let you go ahead and listen to that.
Here's a complete disc jockey show with all the modern pace of today's exciting radio.
And a very pleasant good afternoon. Welcome to the Thursday edition of The Chuck Nelson Thing. Good to have each and every one of you along song after song, and lots of those on the way today from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, along with those wide open memory lines for your favorites too, like we always do and have done for the past 11 plus years at 985-1300 or 1-888-985-9400, the magic numbers for you. And it was always going to be some other day, you know, it was coming up and all that kind of thing. Well, all of a sudden it's here. It's the final day of the Chuck Nelson Thing, and as always, it's great having each and every one of you along. I've been looking at the Omaha weather compared to our forecast. I'll take ours, but I'm going to get theirs, I guess. We'll be in Omaha, Nebraska starting on Monday morning, taking on a whole new position. Somebody asked me what that position is or how it all works, and it's too hard to explain on the air, but it's going to be involving computers and keeping a big company's computer systems up and running and stuff. It's that's what an IT assistant is. You'll be hearing about that a little later on this hour, but somebody was asking me what that is, and it's dealing with a bunch of computer stuff. So it should be fun and very interesting and something I've always enjoyed doing. Around here, though, we're going to have some pretty decent weather. We will cool off a little bit over the weekend, but we'll check the whole thing in about 10 minutes or so and pass it all along to you here. It's certainly a lot nicer than Omaha, where they're expecting 3 to 5 inches of snow tomorrow and cool temps right through the weekend. Anyway, we'll get to all of that. It's all a part of the Thursday edition of the Chuck Nelson Thing. And from there, we went into commercials, of course. For my last sample, yes, we finally made it, folks. For my last sample of things that I'd like you to hear today, I'm going to let you hear the final piece of professional production I did for WMTM radio, and therefore the radio industry as a whole, if you will. And I think this particular piece of production is self-explanatory, and it's almost a nice way to wrap up this entire podcast, and I thank you so much for listening to it. I'll have a few more comments when we're done, but essentially, I want you to hear this last final goodbye from the Chuck Nelson Thing. This aired for 4 days, once an hour, during the final 4 days of my air shift. So they wouldn't play it on other shifts, but they did play it, and, well, I actually played it during the last 4 days of mine. So hopefully you'll enjoy this final goodbye to the radio industry at Cruisin' 94.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Chuck Nelson. The Bible tells us that everything has a beginning and an end, and so it is with the Chuck Nelson Thing. For the past 11 plus years, I've really enjoyed being here every afternoon between 3 and 7, playing all those classic hits. The classic hits will continue here on Cruisin' 94, but the Chuck Nelson Thing will come to an end at 7 p.m. this Thursday, February 23rd. I like to call this radio station the South's best-kept radio secret. Come Monday, I'll be wearing a new hat, and where I'm going, I'll probably need a hat for the next several months. I'll be working for a large company in Omaha, Nebraska as an IT assistant, working to keep the company's business as well as individual user computers running at peak performance. It will be a very different hat, and I will miss each and every one of you and afternoons here enjoying the wonderful South Georgia weather. But this was an offer that was simply too tempting to turn down. I want to take a moment to thank the staff and management here at this wonderful, legendary radio station for allowing me the opportunity to be here and the privilege to be here every afternoon playing your favorites from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The Chuck Nelson thing is going away Thursday, February 23rd at 7 p.m., but the radio station will live on forever. Once again, I thank you so much for listening to me over these past 11 plus years.
Chuck Nelson. Cruising 94.
And yes, if some of you picked up on the fact that that was me singing my own jingle and mixing it with our Cruisin' 94 professionally recorded jingles at the end of that, you are correct. Well, thanks once again for listening to this whole thing. I hope it explains who I am, and I hope it gave any of you that might be thinking of a career in broadcasting some things to think about. I can't certainly promise you a job, but again, if you contact myself or anyone here at Outlook, we can help you in some of those directions. And we can, at least point you down the road to podcasting, which is another vehicle that you now have available that I didn't back when I took my career path. As we pointed out in the earlier portions of this interview, there were a lot of things back then that are no longer the case anymore, and a lot of things have changed. One of my big things that I would have promoted to you years ago is, and I still promote this in a way, get out and meet as many people in an industry that you're interested in being a part of, whether it be broadcasting or something else. The more people you know, the better chances you have of finding some kind of employment. I can tell you, for all the tapes and things that I sent out, the people who actually got to know and interact with me were also the people who hired me. Also, I did do some name dropping in this particular podcast, but I certainly didn't cover all of the people who helped me over the years. Again, knowing people was so important, but I wanted to point out the major ones in my life that had the most impact on my absolute career. So hope I accomplished all those things. And again, thank you so much for listening. I do appreciate you doing that. We'll get back to more normal podcasts next month. But now there shouldn't be any question as to who I am and why I'm here doing these podcasts. And if you still have those, well, here comes our contact information, and you can get in touch, and we'll be happy to explain further.
Well, folks, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this edition of Outlook on Air, but we certainly hope you've enjoyed the program. We hope to see you back here again for another edition of Outlook on Air. And if you'd like more information about Outlook Enrichment, or anything Outlook for that matter, make sure you visit our website at www.outlooken.org. That's www.outlooken.org. Or you can always call us for more information or to schedule any kind of an appointment at area code 531-365-5051. That's area code 531-365-5051. And don't forget to subscribe to our monthly newsletter so that you can find out when the next podcast is available. And we hope to see you then on the next edition of Outlook on Air.